We learn things when we come up to the podium. I have been given a statement that apparently a former student of mine, Assemblyman Luis Alejo, has asked me to read. So I'll see whether I can read it or not. I want to commend the UC Davis Immigration Law Center for their exemplary contribution to justice and our growing immigration community in Northern California. California has proven over and over again how much it values our immigrant community. The spirit of giving and helping for this pursuit of justice is what makes this state a golden state. I know one of our own alum from King Hall, Assemblyman Luis Alejo, has been part of the immigration reform effort, both in the state and federal level. So this is, so I'm supposed to say good things about him. Good, I'm glad to. As a research assistant at the clinic for close to 3 years, Assemblyman Alejo became inspired and formed his foundation for advocacy of immigrant rights in Sacramento. Assemblyman Luis Alejo has contributed to immigration reform efforts through the passage of important state laws. He took the lead in increasing the minimum wage by authoring AB 10, which will raise the minimum wage to $10, making it the highest in the nation. That's actually not true. Washington is higher. He also carried the torch of AB 60 to make sure all immigrants have the right to apply for a driver's license. Mr. Alejo was also principal co-author of AB 4, the Trust Act, which makes sure local law enforcement build strong relationships with immigrant communities to keep families together. Now, I must say that I didn't know that I was reading. I thought there was just a statement that I was supposed to read about these folk, but it was about Luis also. He's a former student of mine who's always been interested in education, interested in immigration, and indeed he's been working for those things since he got elected to the Assembly. So he's done a wonderful job. I'm here to talk about the work that UC Davis Law School is doing in immigration through its clinical program. And I must say that I tell my students that they have three somewhat different skills to learn. One is to learn the law. Two is to learn to take examinations, which oftentimes has little to do with knowing the law. And three, to learn how to be lawyers. And that takes a completely different skill than being a law student. By combining the clinical program with classroom education, the students then really learn, I think, all three skills that they need to go on and have a successful bar examination and become lawyers. I've been involved, though I haven't been a clinician. My first teaching job was in New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And I was asked to teach a clinical program because I had the experience of criminal misdemeanor defense. And I just want to tell you a story to give you a sense of how much students, it seems to me, learn. We had a case where a young man had been arrested for driving dangerously. And he said that what happened was this. He was a young African-American who came from a small town to the big city of Albuquerque to sign up for the military. The paperwork was such that it couldn't be finished that day, so he had to stay overnight. He stayed overnight with some friends. Unfortunately, there was an altercation and a gun was shown by one of the parties, not used but shown. And so one of the others said, go call the cops. So he called the sheriff. They were outside the city limits. He called the sheriff, and the sheriff said, well, there's a car nearby, but unfortunately the car doesn't have a radio in it, so we can't radio it. So, but it's just very close to you. So if you go there, tell them that we sent you there, and they'll follow you to the car. So he jumped in his car. He goes there. He finds the car, and he drives back to the house as fast as he can. And before he knew it, there was a second a sheriff's car behind him, then a third, then a fourth, and he thought, boy, they're really efficient around here. Until one of them forced him off the road, and the other sheriffs jumped out of their cars pointing guns and rifles at him. It turned out that he was going so fast he lost the original car. The other cars just saw this kid going barreling down the road, and they started following him, and he wouldn't stop even though they had their red lights on and so on. And so they arrested him. Of course, we went to court, and at court the two officers testified against him. And the student who was representing him was a student, because he was a third-year student. And they both testified that he was going very fast. Even though they put their lights on, he didn't stop. They finally had to force him to stop, and so he was driving dangerously. And then he testified in terms of what happened. They said it's impossible. There are never any cars out there without radios. He's got to be lying. And so the judge found him guilty. And then, however, I should tell you one other thing that really bothered me. One of the officers mimicked his accent. And when the judge said he was going to find him guilty, the students sort of didn't quite know what to do. So then I got up and I said, Your Honor, I can't allow this case to stop without calling to the court's attention the discourtesy of one of the witnesses in mimicking our client's accent. And the judge said, well, counsel, I can assure you that was not a factor in my finding your client guilty. Didn't say anything to the cop, didn't admonish him or anything. I was very disappointed. But then I suggested to the students she make a motion to not issue the judge's judgment for 48 hours to give us a chance to investigate. The young student went out and was able to talk to the officer who had made the phone call to him, got a declaration under oath saying, yes, I called and told him that because, in fact, we never do put cars out, but, in fact, we needed the car. It had just come in. We couldn't put a radio or even the paraphernalia on it, and we did send it out, and I remember the call, and that's exactly what I told him. Then he got another declaration under oath from the person that did the work on the cars, saying, yes, a car came in, and I did not have a chance to do that work. We went back to court, and the court then changed its mind and found him not guilty. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, you know, what busy lawyer would take all that time for a misdemeanor case? But by golly, the students used to complain that we had them do too much work. They would say, well, the lawyers downtown don't do that much. And we said, we want you to learn how to do it right. Later, when you know how to do it right, you can decide what steps you can skip. And so I just tell you that, even though it's not in a clinical concept, because the lawyers here, the students here act as lawyers. They appear before the appellate courts. They appear before the immigration judges, and they do a tremendous job. In fact, one of their clients is here tonight. and so I just would like to introduce them, and I hope that they'll tell you a bit about the clinic, both in terms of how it is now and how it began. Now, I should tell you that I've always thought that it's really fancy to introduce somebody who has 3 or 4 names. So I turned to the mother-in-law of one of the persons who I'll be introducing, and thinking that she would give me this long name. But I have the pleasure now of introducing you 2 of the persons with the shortest names. One is Holly Cooper, who'll tell you about what they're doing now. I've only known her for a few years. And one is Jim Smith, whom I've known for a few decades. And he began the program.
So I guess I'll go ahead and get started so we can all get out of here. But my name is Holly Cooper, and I'm the Associate Director of the Immigration Law Clinic. And what we do, I think that the most important thing about the award is it's given to the Immigration Law Clinic. It's not given to the lawyers and the students alone. It's also given to our clients. Because what their clients agree to do when they're our clients is to have a student sort of experiment for educational purpose. And it's no small feat. Because our clients are in prison, seeking liberty, seeking to overturn convictions, And they're also facing exile, lifetime exile, to a country that a lot of times they've never known. So for our clients, it is no small feat to agree to be a client of the Immigration Law Clinic. And with that, I would like to say that one of our clients was interviewed by David and said that for her, working with our students was a transcendental experience. But I would like to turn that over and say, for our students to work with the clients, to go into prison for the first time, to be able to watch a client walk out of a prison door, knowing that it was their labor that assisted the client, getting to know, to overturn the rhetoric in the immigration debate that we have right now of aliens and criminal aliens and creating this enormous stigma. It's a transcendental experience for me, both myself and for my students, to be able to work and to understand that these are human beings. And we're incarcerating immigrants on a rate that's the fastest growing prison population in the United States. And with that, I'd also like to say that it's also a lot of times a metaphor, I think, for a lot of our students, for immigrants themselves, for their own internal struggles, to keep their families together when their own families have been torn apart by deportation. I know a lot of people talked about how family has affected them, and I think a lot of times we'd see that same scenario played out. And in one recent case, I'd just like to do one anecdotal case, is that after the earthquake in Haiti, our law students went down to assist with medical visas. We saw horrors that you can't imagine, people with amputated legs, children who were missing parents, people still caught under the rubble, and we were helping evacuate and do medical visas. And through it all, I got to know one of my interpreters very well, and he was a very quiet, very humble man. And I finally uncovered from him that he had been deported from the United States about 15 years before. And I said before I left, I remember it was like dark, there was no electricity, in front of a kerosene lamp. And he said, I asked him, would you like me to look into your deportation order and see if it was valid? He said, whatever you do, Ms. Cooper, that's fine if you do that, but just don't give me false hope. And I said, okay, I'll try not to do that. And so, of course, I got a team of students to work on the case. They got the old transcripts from the mid-90s, and they uncovered that this man had been falsely and erroneously deported as a Haitian. He was deported when his child was 1 year old. And we went before the court in Louisiana and alleged an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. And the lawyer who did his case was now an elected district attorney in Louisiana. And as soon as we filed that bar complaint against him, he turned around and threatened to bar complaint against my students and myself. But being a native Texan, I said, don't mess with Texas. And I said, you're using your position of power as a DA improperly. And we filed another bar complaint against him. And at that point, he stopped. But we finally got the judge to agree that, yes, you're right, he did suffer ineffective assistance of counsel, albeit at the hands of a now elected DA. But I have no jurisdiction because your client has been out of the country. We have no jurisdiction over a man who's outside the United States. My students appealed the case all the way up. This summer, after 3 years of waiting, we finally won the appeal. And they said, you do have jurisdiction over, a person who's been erroneously deported. To make a long story short, we tried to get him back in the United States. And they called us and they said, on Friday at 3 p.m., they called me and said, we'll have your client's visa ready in Port-au-Prince in the U.S. Embassy on Monday morning. But you got to get there and you got to use it in 24 hours. And I thought, what the heck? So I flew down to Port-au-Prince with my client. We made it through the embassy, and we flew into JFK, where they had the option of taking him to detention for his new trial. And so I was waiting in the baggage claim for him. I was sitting on the baggage on top of all of his belongings. And the officer came out, and he said, in his thick New York accent, he's like, are you here to vouch for this man? And I said, if I just flew from UC Davis to Port-au-Prince to New York City, of course I'll be here to vouch for this man. And they didn't take him into custody, and my students had prepared the entire case as to why he should not be taken into custody. And the next day, he was reunited with his daughter, who was now 18, that he hadn't seen since he was 1 year old. And he said to tell your students, Ms. Cooper, they couldn't be here because we couldn't afford it on our tight budget, right? That this has been the best day of my entire life. And for me as well, it was a transcendental experience because it gives your life so much meaning with all the banalities that we encounter so many times. But without that, I would like to turn it over to my mentor. I would like to also thank my family, my mother-in-law, Susan, and my father-in-law, Maury, and my my friend Sylvia Moreno and her husband Rodney Lane, my children Sam and Oscar, who've sat through this whole thing with very great patience, my client who's also here, as well as my husband and my mother and my father, who have taught me everything that I know. And so I would like to say thank you to them, and I would like to turn it over to my mentor, Jim Smith, who's the founder of the Immigration Law Clinic and taught me everything that I know. And it's only through his courage that I've learned to be half the lawyer that he is.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, David. And thank all of you for being here tonight. You know, one of the thoughts I had in my mind about the importance of this event is a quote that I remember from Noam Chomsky, one of the great linguistic and political analysts of our time. And he said, you know, we've evolved into a society that is much better at creating consumers than citizens. And I thought, well, there's a lot of evidence for that proposition. But right here tonight, there's a lot of evidence that that's not what it's all about. Perhaps that quote, which is certainly stunning from Professor Chomsky, confuses quantity with quality. What we see here tonight with David Greenwald and his phenomenal focusing in on the social justice issues in this community, the honorees, the extraordinary stories, including the one we just have heard, shows us that we have both in the public and private sphere here in Yolo County and its environments, many, many individuals fully committed to making this a better society. And in focusing on those in the margins, those that are forgotten. Holly's talking about, you know, to be an alien criminal, imagine that label on you, stuck off in some black hole in a detention center. These gulags have prospered since they came about during the Clinton years, I'm sorry to say, and where individual after individual are completely lost, having no connections with the outside, and Holly and her students have gone out there and have done the kind of miraculous work that we just heard about. And that brings me to, and I want to be brief, to the very fact that David, in his great insights about social justice work, has mentioned the University Service Award here tonight. Living as we do in a university town, the extraordinary asset, resources of students, brilliant students, hardworking, ready to work in cases like this, or ready to work as interns in the Vanguard Watch, that is an enormous asset. And the fact that the university programs do permit their students to be engaged in that is really important, because that's building another generation that's going to be focused on these issues. We need more of that, and I'm very grateful to David for his recognition of that important asset in this community. Thank you very much.